This week we're here at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts to interview world-renowned linguist and philosopher Noam Chomsky. Someone who's authored over 100 books on everything from war to propaganda, I wanted to get his take on democracy and elections within the context of American empire. As extreme as the political spectrum is right now in the US, there's still almost complete uniformity on the war on terror, the stance toward Latin America, sanctions on Iran, and there's really no anti-war candidate, despite popular opinion agreeing on that. Why can no candidate touch that?
The spectrum is broad, but in an odd sense. The spectrum is basically from center to extreme right, way off the spectrum. So the Republican Party about 20 years ago basically abandoned any pretense of being a normal political party. In fact, distinguished, respected conservative commentators from the American Enterprise Institute, right-wing think tank, like Norman Ornstein, described the Republican Party as a radical insurgency, which has abandoned parliamentary politics. They just don't want anything to happen. Their only policies are don't do anything or bomb. And that's not a political party. It's what happened is that the party, during the whole neoliberal period, both parties shifted to the right, as everywhere in the world, and the Republicans just went off the spectrum. They became so dedicated to the interests of the extreme wealthy and powerful that they couldn't get votes. So they had to turn to other constituencies, which are there, but were never politically mobilized. Christian evangelicals, nativists who are afraid they're taking our country away from us, people who are so terrified that they have to carry a gun into a coffee shop, and that's their base, essentially. And when you look at just take a look at the primaries. I mean, any candidate who has a semblance of rationality is not even competing. So that's the Republicans. The Democrats have shifted to the right as well. Today's mainstream Democrats are pretty much what used to be called moderate Republicans. Somebody like Eisenhower, for example, would be considered way out on the left. So, for example, Eisenhower strongly made it very clear, as he put it, that anyone who questions the programs of the New Deal is just not part of American political life. Well, by now that's a left-wing program. It's basically Bernie Sanders' program. Yeah. That's Eisenhower. So the spectrum just is, it's true that it's broad, but in a very strange sense. As far as anti-war candidates are concerned, you have to ask what it means. So, for example, Obama is considered an anti-war candidate. He described the Iraq War as a mistake, a strategic blunder, as he put it. I mean, that's like Russian generals in Afghanistan in the early 1980s who criticized the invasion as a strategic blunder. That's not criticism of the war. It's saying you're making a mistake. The debate about the Obama's is running a global terror program of a kind that has never been envisioned before, the drone program. It's now being discussed to an extent because of recent leaks, but the questions that are being raised overwhelmingly, I mean, not by Jeremy Scale and Glenn Greenwald, but by most of those who are talking about it, is are you killing too many civilians? What about just assassinating people because you think someday they might want to harm you? I mean, suppose, for example, that Iran was murdering people in the United States because they think, with some reason, that they might want to harm them. For example, the editors of the New York Times and the Washington Post, who publish articles, op-eds, calling for bombing of Iran. So suppose they said, well, this is an imminent threat, let's kill them. Would we accept that? The idea that we have the right to use force and violence at will is accepted pretty much across the spectrum. Now take, say, the Iran negotiations. Virtually everyone, president, political leaders, commentators in the press, dovish commentators, almost universally say that if we unilaterally think we detect some Iranian violation of the agreements, then we have a right to use military force to attack them. I mean, that's just outlandish in terms of international law and practice, but it's universal, virtually universal. You have to go way to the margins to find somebody who'll question that.
And there's not even a mild critique of the assassination program or even the war on terror, the premise, from any of these candidates. And every 4 years, we're made to feel like we're playing this great role, this great democratic practice, in decision-making where we celebrate electing these leaders who rule over us. I mean, how does power really function in our society?
But there's very good studies of this from mainstream political science, nothing on the edges. So one of the main topics that's studied in academic political science is the relation between people's attitudes and public policy. And it's a pretty straightforward study. You see public policy, there's very good polling evidence on what people think about things. So, for example, for about 40 years, a considerable majority of the public has thought that taxes should go up on the rich. Taxes go down on the rich. A substantial part of the public, often a big majority, thinks that we ought to have a national health care program. Nothing. Impossible. In fact, when the press discusses this, they call it politically impossible, meaning the pharmaceutical companies won't accept it, the insurance companies won't accept it, and so on. So it basically doesn't matter what the public thinks. About 70% of the public, lowest 70% on the income scale, are pretty much disenfranchised. Their attitudes have no detectable influence on the policies of their own representatives. As you move up the scale, you get a bit more influence. When you get to the top, policies made, and the top can mean a fraction of 1%. So it's kind of a plutocracy with democratic forms. And the elections, by now it's almost become a joke, but it's always been true that campaign financing plays a very substantial role in not only who's elected, but what the policies are. That goes back 100 years. The great campaign manager 100 years ago, Mark Hanna, was asked once, what are the important things that you have to run a campaign? He said there are three things. First one's money. The second one's money. And I forget what the third one is. And pretty much that's true. With the current reactionary Supreme Court, it's just gone out of sight. Campaign spending is, the billions and billions of dollars.
And people have argued it's just because of too much government interference. We need to widen the market. We need capitalism to be more free. I mean, you've argued that in any scenario of capitalism working, it's incongruous, it's incompatible with democracy.
There was recently an IMF study, International Monetary Fund, study of the profits of the big banks in the United States. The financial sector has become enormous during the neoliberal period. It's almost half the profit of corporate profit. Now, where does their profit come from? Turns out it comes from the taxpayer. There's an implicit government guarantee against failure. It's not in law, but it's understood that if a major financial institution gets into trouble, the government will bail it out, which happens repeatedly. Only during the neoliberal period, incidentally. There were no major failures during the 50s and the 60s, when the neoliberal policies began to be instituted. Then you start getting a series of financial crises. And every time the public bails them out. Well, that has consequences. For one thing, it means that the credit agencies understand that these corporations are high valued beyond the level of what they actually do, because they're going to be bailed out. So they get good credit ratings. It means they can get cheap credit. They can get cheap loans from the government. They can, of course, they get the bailouts. They can undertake risky transactions, which are profitable, because if it goes wrong, the taxpayer will take care of it. Net result is that amounts to practically all their profits. Is that capitalism? Energy. There was another IMF study of government subsidies to energy corporations around the world, not just the U.S. They estimated about, I think, $5 trillion a year, which includes the U.S., of course. Plenty of subsidies. Agribusiness is subsidies.
But isn't that what the whole new libertarian movement would tell you, is that precisely the government is being used as an extension of the market to protect this kind of like irregular form of capitalism that's hand in glove with the government, and we just need to kind of free up government regulation and let capitalism work on its own?
First of all, the business world would never tolerate that. They rely heavily on government. But if you did follow the libertarian prescription, what are called remember, what's called libertarian in the United States has nothing to do with traditional libertarianism. It's a kind of ultra-right capitalist, anarcho-capitalism, they call it. If that was allowed to function, the whole society would collapse, and we turn to total tyranny. We would have tyranny of unaccountable private institutions. Private concentration of capital is totally unaccountable to the public. It's absolute tyranny. The only thing that protects the public from predatory capitalism is some degree of state intervention. So it's true that the state intervention does support the capitalist institutions. It also protects the society from total destruction. A predatory capitalist system it simply couldn't survive. For perfectly obvious reasons. For one thing, it wouldn't care about externalities, effects on others. So within no time, it would destroy the environment simply by destroying resources, pouring carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Who cares? Furthermore, there would be no public goods. The markets, there's an ideology which claims that markets provide freedom of choice, so they're kind of democratic. That's not true, and we all know it's not true. So, for example, suppose I want to get home this evening. The market does offer choices. A Ford or a Toyota doesn't offer the choice I want, which is a public transportation system. That's not part of the market. The market focuses you on individual consumption of consumer goods, period. Is that what you want in life? Just more and more gadgets around? There are lots of other things in life which the market doesn't even offer. So what's called libertarianism is a prescription for complete disaster. I don't think the people advocating it understand this. I'm not criticizing them, but just think it through. And I should say it's very anti-libertarian. Traditional libertarianism, which was always on the left, was opposed to the master-servant relation, people giving orders and other people taking them. That's libertarianism, and not in this version.
A few weeks ago, the U.S. military intentionally bombed a hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan. The U.S. government felt it enough to just apologize. And there's people leaping to the defense of the establishment here, saying there must have been a good reason. Either they did it on accident, even though we know that they didn't, or there was Taliban hiding in there, and so it justified, obviously, this human shield logic, just like Israel does. How does this specific example illustrate how American exceptionalism functions?
Well, we have to be careful about the term American exceptionalism. And for one thing, it's not at all exceptional. Every imperial power has behaved the same way, sometimes worse. So it's just normal imperial practice. It's called exceptionalism, but nothing about that. Of course, it's supposed to be exceptional in that we have the highest ideals. So maybe we make mistakes, but it's always with the highest ideals. That's American exceptionalism. Except that, too, is true of just about every imperial power. So when the British were destroying the world, they were always doing it with the absolutely highest ideals, the leading figures, leading intellectuals, people like John Stuart Mill, estimable people, were describing England as an angelic country beyond anything that anyone's ever imagined. People can't understand how marvelous we are, and so on. The French were the same. It's hard to find an exception. So there's no exceptionalism. In the case of the Kunduz hospital, apparently, I mean, I don't think all the details have come out, but it seems that they were trying to kill some people they regarded as Taliban leaders or activists, and they happened to be in the hospital, so they killed everybody. And there is a lot of criticism of killing the others. What about killing the person they were targeting? I mean, what right do we have to kill somebody in some other country who we don't like? I mean, I don't like them either, don't like the Taliban at all. But does that mean we have a right to go kill them? I mean, do they have a right to go kill us if they don't like us? That's not questioned at all. What's questioned is, and criticized, is attacking a hospital and killing the staff and killing the patients. And, that's not the first time. So, for example, when the U.S., one of the lauded achievements of the U.S. Army in Iraq is the conquest of Fallujah in November 2004. Take a look at it. Just take a look at the New York Times, the days of the attack on Fallujah. The first day of the attack, there's a picture on the front page. You can practically visualize it, which is a picture of the General Hospital in Fallujah. Marines attacked the General Hospital, threw the patients off their beds, put them on the floor, put shackles around them, threw the doctors on the floor. Attacking a hospital is a gross violation of international law. But they were asked, why did you attack it? They said because it was a propaganda agency for the rebels. How was it a propaganda agency? It was releasing casualty figures. And that was okay. That's an achievement. But even beyond that, what were the Marines doing in Fallujah? I mean, are there Iranian Marines in Cambridge? What are U.S. Marines doing in Iraq? The invasion of Iraq is the worst crime of this century. It's had horrible effects, but it's now spawned sectarian conflicts that are tearing the region apart. But suppose it had worked. Suppose it had pacified Iraq and there was no disasters. It's still a major crime. Why do we have the right to invade another country? And in fact, if you look back, there's another crime which is never discussed. In the 1990s, the sanctions on Iraq were so severe that they virtually destroyed the society. In fact, the sanctions were administered by the United Nations, and the international diplomats who administered the sanctions were respected international diplomats. Dennis Halliday, Hans von Sponek. They both resigned in protest on the grounds that the sanctions were genocidal. Their term, not mine. They said the sanctions are genocidal, they're destroying the society, they're strengthening the dictator, they're forcing the population to rely on him for survival, and probably they saved him from being overthrown from within, as happened to one after another, a dictator of the same sort. That was the 1990s. That's considered no problem. That was liberal Democrats. Well, I mean, by the time that Bush and Blair decided to invade Iraq, the society was half devastated. So you hit a very fragile system with a sledgehammer, you're going to have horrible results. But the very idea of invading is criminal, and try to find someone who describes it as a crime.
Right.
Obama is praised because he describes it as a mistake. Does he describe it as a crime? Does anyone? Except way out at the fringes.
It was the dumb war, right? And
dumb war.
Yeah,
we
dumb
shouldn't
war.
do dumb things. We do smart things.
Yeah, we do smart wars.
It's like German generals after Stalingrad, who said it's really stupid to have a two-front war. We should have destroyed England first.
Well, I always think it's interesting that people use the rationale that we didn't find WMDs as if that would have been a rationale to invade and occupy a country, finding weapons of mass destruction. I mean, it's insane.
And in fact,
completely insane.
If they're concerned about weapons of mass destruction, there are ways to proceed. The UN inspectors are doing a fine job. Actually, pretty much the same, similar questions arise in the case of the Iran nuclear deal. So Iran, according to the United States, poses a grave threat to the world. That's pretty much an American and Israeli obsession. Most of the world doesn't see it that way. Let's say it's a threat. Suppose Iran poses a threat. Are there simple ways of dealing with this? In fact, there are. And in fact, very popular ones. The best way to deal with it would be to work towards instituting a nuclear weapons-free zone in the region. That's supported by almost the entire world. It's strongly supported by Iran. In fact, they're one of the leading advocates of it.
Yeah, when you're not even acknowledging that Israel has them, then
that's the problem. The U.S. won't permit it because it does not want Israeli nuclear weapons to be open to inspection. So therefore, we block the obvious way to deal with whatever problem there is. And it is supported by virtually the entire world. Comes up every 5 years at the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. And in fact, the continuation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty is actually contingent on doing this. That was agreed 20 years ago. That's the most important arms control treaty there is. If that treaty collapses, we're gone. Everybody will have nuclear weapons and be using them. But the U.S. is so committed to protecting Israel's nuclear weapons that it's willing to endanger the Non-Proliferation Treaty and prevent the obvious means from keeping nuclear weapons away from Iran in case they have any interest in developing them. Do you see a word of discussion of this outside of the arms control literature? And I write articles, but way out at the fringes. Nothing that could possibly make the mainstream.
There's this huge amount of grassroots energy donations around getting people elected who are believed to be able to give us solutions to the problems that we face, Noam. What do you think we should be focusing our energy on?
Take, say, the Bernie Sanders campaign, which I think is important, impressive. He's doing good and courageous things. He's organizing a lot of people. That campaign ought to be directed to sustaining a popular movement which will use the election as a kind of an incentive, but then go on. And unfortunately, it's not. When the election's over, the movement's going to die. And that's a serious error. The only thing that's going to ever bring about any meaningful change is ongoing, dedicated, popular movements which don't pay attention to the election cycle. It's an extravaganza every 4 years. You have to be involved in it, so fine. We'll be involved in it, but then we go on. If that were done, you could get major changes.
immigration. You have been very critical of Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, who has wanted to increase the number of these H-1Bs.
I was not at all critical of him. I was not at all. In fact, frankly, he's complaining about the fact that we're losing some of the most talented people. They go to Harvard, they go to Yale, they go to Princeton, they come from another country, and they're immediately sent out. I am all in favor of keeping these talented people here so they can go to work in Silicon Valley.
So you're in favor
I
of
am not
increasing this?
at all critical of him.
Where did I read this and come up with this that you were...
Probably, I don't know, you people write this stuff. I don't know. Just one thing. I am the only person in either campaign that's self-funding. I'm putting up 100% of my own money. And right now, I will be putting up a tremendous... So far, I put up less than anybody, and I have the best results. Wouldn't that be nice if the country could do that? But I will be putting up, tremendous amounts of money. Super PACs are a disaster. They're a scam. They cause dishonesty. And you better get rid of them, because they are causing a lot of bad decisions to be made by some very good people. And I'm not blaming these folks, but I guess I could. Very good people are making very bad decisions right now. And if anything comes out of this whole thing with some of these nasty and ridiculous questions, I will tell you, you better get rid of the super PACs, because they're causing a big problem with this country. Not only in dishonesty and what's going on, but also in a lot of bad decisions that are being made for the benefit of lobbyists and special interests.
Mr. Trump, just a minute. Let me follow up on this. You had talked a little bit about Marco Rubio. I think you called him Mark Zuckerberg's personal senator because he was in favor of the H-1B.
I never said that. I never said that.
So this was an erroneous article the whole way around?
I said another gentleman in Florida who happens to be a very nice guy, but not...
My apologies. I'm sorry.
He's really doing some bad facts.
Since I've been mentioned, can I respond?
Yes, you did.
Now, the Democrats have the ultimate super PAC. It's called the mainstream media.
Joining us now with reaction to tonight's presidential debate is candidate, the #1 frontrunner in the polls, Donald Trump is with us. Mr. Trump, how are you, sir?
Hi, Sean.
I've got to be honest, we spent a lot of time talking about this. Right out of the gate, I felt John Harwood was extraordinarily unfair to you and attacking you in the line about the clown and unnamed sources that tell him that you would fly before that ever passed. I've got to imagine that that's pretty aggravating for you. What's your reaction to it?
Well, I don't know. I think we did very well tonight. The debate itself went very well, and the audience started booing him. And, I guess I expected him #1 in the polls, and I would maybe expect it. But I thought it was unnecessary, and it was very interesting. I think the result was very interesting, but the evening was a great success.
One of the big moments of this debate, and I actually think you got the better of this moment, was the exchange that you had with John Kasich. Let me play it for you, remind our audience, and let them see how this went down.
First of all, John got lucky with a thing called fracking, okay? He hit oil. He got lucky with fracking, believe me. That's why Ohio is doing well. And that's important for you to know. Number two, this is the man that was a managing general partner at Lehman Brothers when it went down the tubes and almost took every one of us with us, including Ben and myself, because I was there and I watched what happened, and Lehman Brothers started it all. He was on the board and he was a managing general partner. And just thirdly, he was so nice. He was such a nice guy. And he said, I'm never going to attack. But then his poll numbers tanked. That's why he's on the end. And he got nasty. So you know what? You can have him.
Okay, let me respond. First of all, Ohio does have an energy industry, but we're diversified. We're one of the fastest growing states in the country. We came back from the dead. And you know what? It works very, very well. And secondly, when you talk about me being on the board of Lehman Brothers, I wasn't on the board of Lehman Brothers. I was a banker, and I was proud of it. And I traveled the country and learned how people make jobs.
Well, what is your overall reaction? Because in the last 24 hours, 36 hours, John Kasich, the governor, seems to be getting far more aggressive and hostile. Where do you think it's coming from?
Well, he has very bad poll numbers. I mean, it's very simple. So he attacked us, and I think it was inappropriate. But that just came from poll numbers. I mean, he seems like a nice guy, but he has very, very low poll numbers, and therefore he attacked us. So I think it worked out very well for me.
this. Let me go to the issue of the substance of your economic plan, because there's a lot to it. And I don't know who these unnamed sources that John Harwood was talking about, but you talk about trillions of dollars that would be repatriated.
Think they exist. Hey, Sean, I don't think those sources exist. I don't believe they exist.
I actually got the impression it was his personal opinion. It was a great line when you mentioned Larry Kudlow, who works on CNBC, and you said, well, you may want to fire. And yeah, I like Larry. He's a friend of mine. He is a good guy. And I think he's going to run for senator. Explain your economic plan, though, because what he didn't seem to factor in was the economic growth aspect of repatriated money and a lower corporate tax rate, et cetera. So I want you to give us some specifics.
We're lowering taxes. Sean, we're lowering taxes big league. We're bringing the rates down. You know, we're the highest tax in the world. We're the highest tax country right now, and it's not even close. We're bringing the rate down to 15% for corporations. We're simplifying the code. We're bringing it down to 10. You know, you're able to get your money back in. We have right now $2.5 trillion outside of this country that can't get in. We're bringing that rate way down. Everybody's going to bring the money back in. It's going to be used in our country and so many other things. And then, of course, we're starting to cut. And we're going to cut expenses and cut waste and fraud and abuse. And we're going to have a really dynamic country again.
Mr. Trump, it's estimated that there's some $4 trillion overseas that multinational corporations won't bring back to this country because of the high taxation rate.
Yeah.
Right. It's corporate inversion, repatriation.
It's all about the corporate. It's corporate inversion. Right.
Wouldn't those corporations spend the money here, build manufacturing here, if they had the ability to bring it back?
They would. They would spend it here. They want to bring it back. They can't bring it back. The tax is too high, and the bureaucracy is too high. The paperwork is unbelievable. They can't get it back in. So you know what they're doing? They're leaving our country and going to another country to get their money and to get lower taxes, and they're taking thousands and thousands of jobs, Sean.
Let me ask you, when you talked about John Kasich being lucky and the whole issue of fracking, in a way, I was thinking, couldn't the whole country be lucky because we have more natural gas, more energy resources than the entire Middle East combined, and we don't tap into it? How big an impact, through your economic estimate and your economic plan, would it have on the economy?
Massive. Bigger than Saudi Arabia, bigger than anything. Massive. If a state or an area of the country is lucky enough to be sitting on the right soil and the right land, they should be doing it, and they should make a fortune for themselves, cut taxes, do a lot of things, but absolutely they should do it. And some people don't do it. Some people don't do it. I mean, I could name one in particular that's not doing it and sitting on top of a bonanza.
Yeah, you're talking about New York State, where I live, and upstate New York is suffering financially because of it.
It is sitting on a bonanza. It's sitting on one of the greats. And by the way, it's being lost because Pennsylvania and others, believe me, are sucking it right out. So New York is losing a lot by not taking that oil, the gas. I mean, they have tremendous power there. And you know how high taxes are in New York? We're losing a lot by not taking it. And other areas like Pennsylvania, they're taking it. And that doesn't, go by lines. That stuff flows, and they're taking it. New York is losing a tremendous amount.
It was very interesting to me tonight to watch how bad the media was, and to watch all the other candidates tonight in a very different way come to your defense. And that included Mike Huckabee. That included Ted Cruz.
It's true.
What was your reaction to that?
I thought it was great. I mean, we have a great relationship. And I really thought it was great. There was a certain camaraderie up there tonight, not only with respect to me, but with respect to everybody. I thought it was very beautiful to watch.
Yeah. Last question. The media seems to have a real hard time grasping the idea that you're going to build a wall and that you're going to make Mexico pay for it. And as you were trying to give your answer tonight, I wanted to hear the rest of it. And I want you to explain to our audience exactly how that would happen, because the media seems to lack a comprehension about how Mexico's economy is so tightly tied to our economy, and that it would be in their best interest to do so.
Sean, we're going to build a wall. It's going to be paid for by Mexico. We're going to create a border, a real border. We don't have a border now. And if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. We're going to have a door for people to come in legally, but I will tell you, it's going to be a beautiful door. People are going to come in legally, but we're putting up a wall. Mexico's going to pay for it, and we're going to have a border.
And they pay for it, why?
because they make our trade imbalance with Mexico is $50 billion a year. We give Mexico a tremendous amount of money. I love the Mexican people. I employ tens of thousands over the years of Hispanics and people generally. These are great people, but the leaders are too smart for our leaders. What's happening to us is a disgrace, and it cannot happen any longer. So we're going to build a wall, we're going to create a border, and you're going to be very happy.
Last question, we're going to let you go. You've been probably the strongest critic of Governor Jeb Bush. Probably is underperformed by every poll number out there. And for some reason, he was out there attacking Marco Rubio. And I wanted to get, what do you think the strategy was behind it? You're number one in the polls. Ben Carson's been surging a little bit this week. What's your reaction to that, too?
Well, I think Ben is a terrific guy, and I think that, frankly, Marco and Jeb were going at it a little bit, and I sort of said that. And they were going at it, but Ben is standing right next to me, and he's a terrific guy. He's right over here. Hey, Ben, you're a terrific guy. So that's the story.
Well, why don't you bring them all? We can have a group hug on Hannity. We'll bring all the candidates together. You know, I said this earlier. I actually said that it was the candidates that beat the moderators tonight. And in spite of what they wanted,
I think so.
This was a substantive debate tonight. Yeah.
I think so. And there were some little jabs. I'll tell you, there were little jabs, but there was a great camaraderie among the candidates.
All right, Mr. Trump, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for taking time. Great debate for you tonight. Appreciate your time. All right, thank you.
Let me be honest with the people who are watching at home. The government has lied to you, and they have stolen from you. They told you that your Social Security money is in a trust fund. All that's in that trust fund is a pile of IOUs for money they've spent on something else a long time ago. And they've stolen from you because now they know they cannot pay these benefits because Social Security is going to be insolvent in 7 to 8 years. We're sitting up here talking about all these other things. 71% of federal spending today is on entitlements and debt service, and that's with 0% interest rates. Now, I'm the only person who has put out a detailed plan on how to deal with entitlements.
All right, that was New Jersey Governor Chris Christie at tonight's big debate in Boulder, Colorado, and he joins us now with reaction from Boulder. And Governor, I'd say a really good night for you on a lot of different fronts, and not a good night for the media, and not a good night. This is like, it was almost like the Democratic Party wrote a lot of these questions, but you guys stuck on substance. Talk about it. And you were also talking about how that we've been robbed and lied to. Thanks for telling us that the government robbed me blind. I really appreciate, you explaining that to us tonight.
Sean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's exactly what it is. If we don't deal with entitlement reform, and we can't just wish it away, and it's not going to be wished away just by economic growth. We got to do the hard things. We got to treat people like adults and tell them the truth. And as far as the tone on the stage tonight, you saw 10 really good candidates for President of the United States talk to the American people about exactly what they want to do for the future. But what you saw, I think, in me tonight is that I'm tested and I'm ready to maturely and just smartly deal with these issues. That's what we tried to get out there tonight.
But Governor, when you talk about they stole from us, I appreciate the fact that you're being honest, because I believe that that's true. But that means that Americans, I had my first paid job paying Social Security when I was 12 years old. I'm 53 years old. Yep. My entire life I paid into it. You're saying that I'm not going to get that money back, and Americans are not going to get the money that they paid into it? That's how corrupt our government is, and nobody's going to go to jail for that?
Washington, D.C. has shafted us, Sean. And the fact is that everybody who needs that money is going to get it. But there are going to be some of us who have done extraordinarily well in this life who are going to have to make some sacrifice. And we're going to have to acknowledge that we're living longer, Sean. We're going to have to raise the retirement age. But it's not going to affect people who are getting benefits now or who are about to get benefits. But it is going to affect my generation and yours. We're the same age. It's going to affect us, and it's going to affect younger people as well. But the alternative, Sean, is either Hillary Clinton's massive tax increase and massive government intervention even further in our lives, or to have folks who are trying to use this money to get between heat and rent and food paid for them not to have any money. I can't live with that kind of America, Sean, and I don't think most Americans would either.
All right, Governor Christie, as always, thank you so much for being with us. Good night for you tonight. We appreciate it.
The questions that have been asked so far in this debate illustrate why the American people don't trust the media. This is not a cage match. How about talking about the substantive issues people care about? Does this count? Do we get credit for this one? And Carl, I'm not finished yet. The contrast with the Democratic debate, where every fawning question from the media was, which of you is more handsome and wise?
All right, that was Senator Ted Cruz with what I think was the line of tonight's GOP debate. He joins us now with reaction from Boulder, Colorado. Senator, I would argue you changed the entire trajectory of that debate, which, if I was a judge, I would say the candidates combined beat the moderators who were taking the Democratic Party line. That went over extremely well. Explain.
Well, Sean, look, we've seen now over and over again where the media, they are the Democrats' cheerleaders. And in these debates, the media tries. Every question is an insult. Every question is an attack. Every question is asking one Republican to attack another Republican. You know, they don't do that to the Democrats. The Democrats, they give them each a chance to talk about what they believe in. And I got to say, Sean, one of the most ridiculous things, why is it that we keep having debates where the moderators, no one in their right minds thinks any of the moderators actually will vote in a Republican primary? In my view, Republican primary debates ought to be moderated by people who would vote in a primary. How about a debate moderated by Sean Hannity and Mark Levin and Rush Limbaugh? Now that would be a debate. But instead, what
I'm in, and I think I can speak for the other two.
Right.
They're in as well. And I do agree with you, because these questions are downright hostile. And I believe this was a horrible night for the news media. And I will say that in many cases, in many instances tonight, a disgrace to the, quote, profession of journalism. This is a serious issue.
And the reason is that the moderators and the networks don't want the American people to vote for any of the 10 men and women on that stage. They want to beat up whoever the Republican nominee is, and then they want people either to stay home or vote for Hillary. And the purpose of these debates, listen, Republican primary voters are making a choice, and we ought to have questions that focus on our vision for America. For example, today I rolled up out my tax plan, a simple flat tax, the first $36,000 of income for a family of four. There's zero tax, zero income tax, zero payroll tax, and then a simple 10% tax above that. That's the sort of thing we ought to be talking about. Well, how would that tax plan compare to other candidates' plans? Everyone else's plans have much higher rates than a simple 10% plan.
You know,
and the critical thing, I think, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Senator. I apologize. You did get very substantive tonight, because you had an opportunity to really lay out your economic plan. More importantly, you were tackling the third rail of politics, which was Social Security and raising the retirement age. There was a lot of substance going on in spite of the hostility to the questions. I want you to, in light of today's bad economic deal, budget deal that was made, explain how things would be different under your economic plan, because I think that's the type of substance that people want to hear about.
I think you're exactly right. Well, for one thing, the cronyism and the sellout that we're seeing in Congress wouldn't be happening. This budget deal is a disaster. It is Republican leadership joining with the Democrats. Every single Democrat in the House voted for $80 billion more in spending and debt and deficits. It was just a handful of Republicans in leadership. They're going to try to do the same thing in the Senate. And what we need, Sean, is a strong president who stands up and says, this ends now. If you send me a spending bill filled with corporate welfare and cronyism, if you keep growing the debt, I will veto it. And it's one of the reasons, the distinction that I think is perhaps most important that came out tonight, is almost everyone on the stage talked about standing up to Washington. But there's a marked difference if you ask who actually has a record of doing that. Who has stood up not just to Democrats, but to leaders in their own party. And in that regard, I think that's why we're seeing conservatives uniting behind our campaign, because I have a proven record as a consistent conservative of standing up to Washington and fighting for the Constitution.
You know, you keep talking about this divide that does exist, and that is you explain, you talk about the Washington cartel. For example, John Boehner is out. Paul Ryan will step in as Speaker tomorrow. Under John Boehner, our debt went up $4.1 trillion. You tried to use the power of the purse. I assume there's probably a fine line. You can't use it all of the time, but on issues like Obamacare, Planned Parenthood, illegal immigration, are they three examples where maybe the Republican Party ought to be in a room strategizing and using that enumerated constitutional power? You know, where do they use it? When would you use it or advise them to use it?
Right. Hey, Sean, of course you're right that we have Republican majorities in both houses. We ought to use the constitutional power given to Congress. Here's the sad reality. Republican leadership is in a room strategizing, but it's not how to beat Harry Reid and Pelosi and Obama. It's how to beat conservatives. It's how, frankly, their target, you know, Mitch McConnell's staff brags to the press that they've developed a strategy to beat Cruz and beat the conservatives and fund all of Obama's agenda. And it's why people are so furious, because we end up, look, this deal was a golden parachute for John Boehner. And if you'll recall, the day Boehner announced he resigned, I said at the time, I said, this means he has cut a deal with Nancy Pelosi to raise the debt ceiling and fund all of Obama's agenda for 2 years. It turned out some of the media criticized me, said, you don't know that. Well, that's exactly what they did.
Well, Senator, I would say this was
people are fed up with it.
Yeah. I've got to run. I would say this is a very big night for you. In part, you got more time in this debate than probably the other two combined, and probably the line of the night against the media. And I want to say something. I would be all in for a moderated debate with me, Rush, and Mark if they're on board. I'll ask Reince Priebus if he's willing to do so. So thank you, sir.
And Sean, let me tell you, the Republican primary voters would love to hear that debate, because you're strong conservatives who would want to stand up, focus on the differences between the candidates, and help people make the decision we need to make.
It wouldn't be a gotcha debate. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your time.
Exactly.
And good night for you tonight.
Take care.
Here now with more reaction to the GOP debate, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Senator, good to see you.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Wouldn't say this was a big night for the media. What was your reaction to the debate in general?
You know, I think one of the funny things is that I agree with Governor Christie. I saw more unity among the Republican field, mainly because they were all unified against the moderators. And the crowd also sensed that the moderators seemed to be a bit biased with all of their questions.
Yeah. Let's talk about what you have planned tomorrow, because and a lot of the candidates tonight were critical of this new budget deal. Again, spending more money, more deficits. You are going to start a filibuster tomorrow. Are you planning on not drinking a lot of water tonight? You planning on being out there a long time?
You know, we'll see what happens. But to me, this deal represents exactly what's wrong with Washington. You've got the Republican establishment making an agreement with the president. And do you know that they're going to raise the debt ceiling by an unspecified amount? So they're giving the power to President Obama in his final year to spend whatever he wants to spend. No limits. There'll be no limit on the debt ceiling when this passes. This is horrendous. Every conservative in the country ought to be up in arms. And I ask them, call your congressman.
The next logical question, though, is why have Republicans allowed this to happen? John Boehner is going to leave his job as Speaker, and Paul Ryan will be the new Speaker tomorrow. But since he's been Speaker, the debt has gone up $4.1 trillion. That doesn't sound like a party of limited government to me.
It bothers me also. And Paul Ryan's going to vote for this increase in the debt, which is an unlimited increase in the debt. They're also busting the budget caps for both military and domestic welfare. And this is the unholy alliance I've been talking about in Washington, where the right gets what they want, increased military spending, the left gets what they want, increased domestic spending, and there's sort of a secret handshake, and all of the spending goes up. But they're bankrupting the country, both the right and the left.
All right. So how do you feel about where you stand in the campaign right now? Poll numbers, I'm sure, are not where you want them to be. Do you take them seriously? And how do you get your poll numbers up, and how do you get at the top of this race?
Right now, the polls are of undecided voters. 2/3 of everybody in every poll they put out is undecided. So there's sort of a fiction, but the media is obsessed with the numbers. They think, oh, it must be math because it's a number. But these numbers mean absolutely nothing now. We have a great ground game. I had 700 kids at the University of Iowa the other day. I had 700 at Iowa State. We are on the ground. We are planning on winning. We're going to be in the middle of this. And we think the polls really don't represent anything and may not till January.
All right. Thank you, Senator, for being with us. We appreciate it.
As Americans, we are appalled. We are disgusted by the attack against the people of Paris by the terrorist organization ISIS. And I know that I speak for everyone here and everyone in our country when we send our condolences to the families who lost loved ones in that barbaric attack, and our prayers go out for speedy recoveries for the many hundreds who were injured. In my view, now is the time for developing a serious and effective strategy to destroy ISIS. Now is not the time for cheap political talk or trying to take political advantage of this difficult moment. Now is the time, as President Obama is trying to do, to unite the world in an organized campaign against ISIS by bringing together all of the countries who have common interest in defeating international terrorism, even countries that we have disagreements with. So I think what the President correctly is trying to do is bring together our European allies, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and others, along with Russia, and along with the Muslim countries who are today face to face with ISIS. What we need is an international coalition, including Iran and Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Kuwait and Turkey. Now, putting together this coalition is not going to be easy, given the many hostilities and long-seated disagreements that some of these countries face. But that is what President Obama and Secretary Kerry are trying to do, and I support their efforts. But let me also say that now is not the time for demagoguery and fear-mongering. If you think about it for a moment, you understand that what terrorism is about is trying to instill terror and fear into the hearts of people. And we will not let that happen. As Americans, we will not be terrorized. We will not live in fear. And I do have to tell you that I am disturbed by some of what I am hearing from my Republican colleagues. And I will just say this. During these difficult times, as Americans, we will not succumb to racism. We will not allow ourselves to be divided and succumb to Islamophobia. And when hundreds of thousands of people have lost everything, have nothing left but the shirts on their backs, we will not turn our backs on the refugees from Syria and Afghanistan. We will do what we do best, and that is be Americans fighting racism, fighting xenophobia, and fighting fear. And perhaps most importantly, we will learn the lessons of history. Yesterday, the chairman of the Republican National Committee stated, and I quote, "Never before have I seen an American president," meaning President Obama, "project such weakness on the global stage," end of quote. Well, as many of you will remember, back in 2002, we had a president, President Bush, you remember President Bush. We had a president, and he was very, very tough, but not very smart. He and Dick Cheney and the whole lot of them, they were tough. And they said we should invade Iraq. We should do it virtually alone. And the result was 6,700 brave men and women from our country dead, hundreds of thousands of our best young people coming home with injuries, physical and emotional, many, many hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead and wounded, huge instability in the entire region, and we are paying the price today for that instability and that chaos. So I say to my Republican colleagues, yeah, we have got to be tough, but not stupid. Yes, we need to create a worldwide coalition that will defeat ISIS, but no, the United States of America must not be involved in perpetual warfare in the Middle East. Let me say something else. There are those, including many Republicans, some in the media, who think that because of this horrific attack, that the only thing that we should focus on is defeating ISIS. And what I say is, yes, we will lead the world in defeating ISIS, but at the same time, we will rebuild the disappearing middle class of this country.